When my 70th birthday arrived, I had imagined something far more peaceful than the tension that filled the air in my own living room. The house was warm, draped in soft yellow lights and gentle music playing in the background, an atmosphere I had carefully curated to celebrate a lifetime of memories with my family. My children, grandchildren, and even a few close friends had gathered, their faces glowing with excitement and affection. Yet, beneath the smiles and polite conversation, a storm was quietly brewing, one I hadn't anticipated. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you how it all unfolded. Melissa, my son's wife, was the unexpected catalyst. From the moment she stepped through the door, her eyes held a sharpness that unsettled me, but I attributed it to her usual nervous energy around large family gatherings. As the evening progressed and the wine flowed, she grew bolder. I caught her sneering under her breath when I recounted stories of my youth and the values I held so dearly: hard work, respect, and loyalty. It was during the toast that she let her guard down, or rather, dropped it altogether. "I don't see what all this fuss is about," she said loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. Her voice carried a mocking edge as she glanced around the room, her smirk unwavering. "It's not like Evelyn had much to do with the family fortune anyway. Let's be honest, she's just the matriarch in name, not in influence." The room fell into an uneasy silence. I felt the sting of her words cut through me like a sudden chill, but I refused to let her see my hurt. Instead, I smiled thinly and met her gaze with quiet resolve. "Ask your parents where the $4 million went," I replied, my voice steady but laced with a secret that hung heavy between us. Her laugh was sharp, almost derisive. "What on earth are you talking about?" she asked, eyes narrowing. The guests around us exchanged puzzled glances. The mood had shifted palpably from celebration to confrontation. I knew I had planted a seed of doubt, and Melissa's composure faltered for just a moment before she masked it with a scoff. "You're grasping at straws, Evelyn," she said, though her voice betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "This is a family party, not a courtroom." But beneath her bravado, I sensed she was rattled. She had always been quick with barbs and dismissive remarks, but tonight there was something different, something personal. I wasn't just an old woman to be belittled, I was a keeper of truths she wasn't ready to face. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of half-hearted conversations and sideways glances. I noticed how Melissa kept to herself, her usual sharp tongue replaced by a quiet, brooding silence. Her husband, my son, seemed equally unsettled, casting worried looks between his wife and me. The family's usual harmony was fractured, and I knew it was because I had unearthed a hint of a past they wanted buried. Later that night, alone in my study, I reflected on the moment. The words I had spoken, "Ask your parents where the $4 million went," were not just a cryptic retort. They were a challenge, a call to uncover a truth that had long been buried beneath polite smiles and carefully crafted stories. I knew the money Melissa's family had managed wasn't just missing. It was a wound that threatened to unravel the fragile fabric of our family's legacy. For years, I had watched from the sidelines as Melissa flaunted her arrogance, dismissing my influence and belittling the traditions I had upheld. She acted as if the family's wealth was hers to command, blind to the sacrifices and careful stewardship that had preserved it through generations. But I knew better. I had always known there were shadows in the past, decisions made behind closed doors, promises broken, and fortunes lost to greed and mismanagement. That night, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the story behind the missing $4 million, not just for myself, but for the family's honor and for the truth that Melissa so desperately tried to hide. This was no longer just about a birthday or a slight insult. It was about reclaiming respect and exposing the fractures that threatened to destroy everything we had built. The next morning, I found myself restless, unable to shake the weight of the previous evening's confrontation. I reached for an old photo album, flipping through images of my family over the decades, weddings, graduations, birthdays, all moments that had seemed perfect in their time. But now each picture felt like a clue, a fragment of a puzzle I was determined to solve. I thought about Melissa's parents, who had once been trusted with managing a significant portion of our inheritance. Their names had always been spoken with a mix of respect and caution, But whispers of financial missteps had surfaced over the years, quietly dismissed as rumors. Yet those rumors now took on new meaning. Could it be true that the $4 million had vanished under their watch? If so, what did that mean for the family's future and for Melissa's brazen attitude? Determined to find answers, I reached out to an old family accountant, a man named Harold Jenkins. Harold had been with our family for decades, a steady presence through ups and downs, and I trusted his discretion and knowledge. When I called him, his voice was warm but tinged with surprise at my request for a meeting. "I'm glad you called, Evelyn," he said after a moment. "There's been talk about the missing funds for years, but no one has wanted to dig too deep. It's complicated, and the truth isn't easy to face." I didn't flinch at his warning. The truth, no matter how painful, was exactly what I needed. We arranged to meet the following day, and as I hung up the phone, a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation settled over me. This was the beginning of something I couldn't yet fully understand, but I was ready to face it head on. As the day wore on, I prepared myself for the journey ahead. I thought about the family gathered in my home, the fragile bonds tested by greed and resentment. I thought about Melissa, her sharp tongue hiding deeper insecurities and secrets. And I thought about myself, not just the matriarch in name, but the guardian of a legacy that demanded truth and justice. Tonight, as I lay awake in the quiet of my room, I realized that this birthday had marked not just another year of life, but the start of a reckoning. The question was no longer who held the wealth, but who would protect it, and the truth from being lost forever. And I was ready to take on that fight, no matter the cost. When I met Harold Jenkins the next morning in his modest office, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and faded leather. It was a room that held decades of our family's history, tucked away in the clutter of ledgers and dusty files. Harold greeted me with a cautious smile, his eyes reflecting the weight of the secrets he'd carried for years. "I wasn't expecting you to take such an interest in the past," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Most people prefer to forget what they don't want to face." I nodded, settling into the worn chair. "Sometimes forgetting only lets the past fester. I need to understand what really happened with the $4 million. Melissa's reaction last night wasn't just arrogance, it was fear." Harold sighed, leaning back as he sifted through a stack of papers. "The money you're referring to was part of a trust set up by your late husband's parents. It was meant to secure the family's future, education, property, investments. But when Melissa's parents took over managing those funds, things took a turn." He pulled out a ledger, the pages yellowed and fragile. "At first, everything was in order. Regular deposits, steady growth. But then, about 10 years ago, irregularities started showing up. Large withdrawals, unexplained transfers. When I raised concerns, I was met with excuses and vague explanations." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "What kind of withdrawals?" Harold's voice dropped to a whisper. "Gambling debts, risky investments overseas, and some funds simply unaccounted for. Melissa's parents tried to cover it up, but the trail was there." The room seemed to close in around me as I absorbed his words. This wasn't just a story of lost money. It was a tale of betrayal and recklessness that had chipped away at the foundation of my family's legacy. And all this time, the truth had been buried beneath layers of polite smiles and false assurances. "How much is missing?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Nearly all of it. The $4 million is gone, vanished into thin air or bad bets. The only reason it wasn't discovered sooner was because they shuffled money around to mask the losses." I closed my eyes, memories flooding back. Melissa's smug attitude, her dismissiveness, now a reflection of her family's shame. The arrogance was a shield, a desperate attempt to hide the cracks behind a facade of confidence. "Why didn't anyone stop them?" I whispered. Harold's face darkened. "Because no one wanted to confront the truth. Melissa's parents were respected, influential. People feared the scandal, the damage it could cause, so they looked the other way." I felt a surge of anger, not just at Melissa's parents, but at the silence that had allowed this to happen. The family I had fought to protect had been betrayed from within, and I had been none the wiser. "Is there any way to recover the funds?" I asked, hope flickering faintly. Unfortunately, most of it is gone for good, but there are legal avenues to pursue, investigations, lawsuits. It won't be easy, and it will take time. I nodded, determination hardening inside me. This was no longer just about money. It was about setting things right, about reclaiming the honor and respect that had been stolen. As I left Harold's office, the weight of the discovery pressed down on me, but it also ignited a fire I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer willing to stand by quietly while my family's legacy was dismantled by greed and deceit. That evening, I sat with a notebook, jotting down everything Harold had told me. The more I wrote, the clearer the picture became, a tangled web of betrayal that stretched far beyond a missing fortune. It was a story of trust broken and respect lost, and I was determined to unravel it. I thought about Melissa again, her laughter at my expense now echoing differently in my mind. Her bravado was a mask, hiding the very shame her family carried. I knew I had to confront her, not with anger, but with the undeniable truth. The next day, I began making calls. Lawyers, financial advisors, anyone who could help me map out the next steps. Each conversation was a piece of the puzzle, slowly guiding me toward a reckoning that could no longer be avoided. As night fell, I found myself reflecting on the years I had spent nurturing my family's values, the same values Melissa had scorned. Hard work, integrity, respect. These were not just words, but the pillars that held us together. And now, I would fight to restore them. I realized that this journey was not just about uncovering a lost fortune. It was about reclaiming my place in a family that had tried to sideline me and about shining a light on the shadows that had been allowed to grow unchecked. Tomorrow, I would face Melissa again. This time, armed with truth and resolve, I would make her see the cost of her arrogance and the price her family had paid. The battle ahead would be difficult, but I was ready. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly alive. I invited Melissa to my study the following afternoon, the familiar scent of aged books and polished wood filling the room where so many family decisions had been made over the years. She arrived with a confident smile, the same one she wore at the party, a mask I was determined to see through. As she settled into the chair opposite me, I noticed the subtle tension in her hands, the way her eyes flickered just a bit too quickly. "Melissa," I began, my voice calm but resolute. "There's something we need to discuss, something I've uncovered about the family finances that concerns you and your parents." Her smile faltered slightly. "I'm listening," she said, though the edge in her tone suggested she was already on the defensive. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. "Do you remember when I told you to ask your parents where the $4 million went? That wasn't a careless remark. It's a question that needed an answer." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Evelyn, I don't know what game you're playing, but I suggest you drop it." I shook my head. "No game, Melissa. The facts are clear. The $4 million entrusted to your parents was lost through reckless gambling, poor investments, and outright mismanagement. I've seen the records myself." The color drained from her face as the words settled between us. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, a flicker of denial flashing before she masked it with disbelief. "That's impossible," she whispered, voice trembling. "My parents would never do such a thing." I held back the urge to reach across the desk and shake her. "They did, Melissa. And your arrogance, the way you dismissed me and my role in the family, that came from a place of shame. You've been hiding behind lies and deflections because you knew the truth." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the hardened exterior cracked. I saw the girl beneath the facade, the one burdened by her family's disgrace and unsure how to face it. But then, the anger surged back, explosive and raw. "You have no right to accuse my family," she snapped, voice rising. "You think you're better than us, but you're just an old woman clinging to a past that's gone." I met her fury with unwavering calm. "I'm not clinging, Melissa. I'm protecting the legacy your parents jeopardized and the future that belongs to all of us." She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back with a harsh scrape against the floor. "You're crazy. This is a family matter, not your personal vendetta." "No," I said firmly. "It's a matter of justice, and you need to understand the consequences of your family's actions and your own disrespect." Her eyes blazed with fury as she stormed toward the door. "This isn't over, Evelyn. I watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving a silence that echoed with the weight of what had just passed. For the first time, the power dynamic between us had shifted. The veneer of control Melissa had maintained was shattered, exposing the raw truth beneath. As the minutes stretched, I sat back in my chair, the room feeling both emptier and yet charged with possibility. Melissa's denial was expected, but her reaction had confirmed one thing. The truth had unsettled her deeply. She had been forced to confront the very shadows she had tried to hide. I thought about the family gathering, the smiles that masked fractures, the whispered tensions beneath polite conversation. Tonight's confrontation was the emotional climax of years of silent suffering, an eruption that could no longer be contained. Yet, even as I acknowledged the victory, I knew the real work was just beginning. Melissa's reaction was not just anger, it was fear. Fear of exposure, of loss, of the reckoning that awaited her family. That fear was a powerful weapon, and a sign that the truth had taken root. Later that evening, I found myself replaying the conversation in my mind. Her voice had cracked, her facade had slipped, and I saw the consequences of years of deceit laid bare. It was a turning point, not just for her, but for the entire family. I reached for my phone, drafting messages to my lawyer and Harold, outlining the next steps. The evidence was now undeniable, and the confrontation had set things in motion that could not be undone. But I also knew this wasn't just about legal battles or financial restitution. It was about restoring respect, reclaiming dignity, and rebuilding trust that had been shattered by greed and betrayal. As I prepared for the challenges ahead, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The confrontation had been difficult, but necessary. Melissa's silence in the coming days would speak volumes, and I was ready to listen and to act. I understood, too, that the family's response would ripple beyond this moment. There would be alliances formed, fractures deepened, and loyalties tested. But I was no longer willing to be sidelined, no longer content to watch from the shadows as the legacy I cherished was dismantled. This was my family, my home, and my fight, and I intended to win. In the days that followed my confrontation with Melissa, the atmosphere within the family grew palpably tense, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. I sensed a shift, not just in the way they looked at me, but in the subtle undercurrents of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. The truth I had unearthed was no longer just a secret locked away in dusty ledgers. It was a living force that threatened to expose fractures long ignored. I found myself drawn deeper into the labyrinth of financial documents and family histories, determined to understand the full extent of the damage and to clarify my own role in safeguarding what remained. Each new piece of information only added layers to the complex tapestry of greed, deception, and misplaced trust. Harold Jenkins became my steadfast ally during this time, his meticulous records guiding me through the maze. Over several meetings in his office, we pieced together not only how the $4 million vanished, but also the reckless decisions Melissa's parents had made. Gambling debts spiraling out of control, ill-fated overseas investments, and a series of clandestine transactions designed to mask their trail. But what struck me most was the revelation of how deeply intertwined these financial missteps were with the family's social dynamics. The respect and influence Melissa's parents commanded had effectively silenced any suspicion or inquiry. They had woven a web of social power that deflected scrutiny and protected them from accountability. As I absorbed these truths, I began to see my own role in a new light. For years, I had been perceived as the quiet matriarch, perhaps sidelined by the younger generation's impatience and ambition. Yet, it was I who had preserved the family's true wealth and honor, even as others gambled it away. I was the guardian of a legacy that went beyond dollars and cents. It was about values, responsibility, and respect. This deeper understanding strengthened my resolve. The family's financial ruin was not just a matter of lost fortune, it was a symptom of a more profound breakdown in trust and integrity, and I was the one who had to bridge that chasm. One afternoon, while reviewing yet another batch of documents, I received a call from my son. His voice was cautious, tinged with the weight of unspoken concerns. "Mom, I think the family needs to talk. We can't keep ignoring this." I agreed, sensing that the time had come to bring these hidden truths into the open. I proposed a family meeting, one where honesty would be the foundation and where we could begin to mend the fractures that greed had caused. The gathering was somber. Faces once filled with celebration were now etched with worry and regret. I spoke plainly, recounting the discoveries about the missing funds, the reckless actions of Melissa's parents, and the impact on our shared future. Melissa sat silently, her usual defiance replaced by a quiet shame that was almost palpable. Others listened with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow, the weight of betrayal settling heavily over us all. In that moment, I realized that my confrontation with Melissa had been only the beginning. The family needed to confront its past collectively, to acknowledge the damage and to commit to rebuilding. I outlined a plan to establish clearer boundaries and demand accountability, not to punish, but to protect what remained and to prevent such devastation from recurring. It was a call for transparency, responsibility, and healing. As the meeting drew to a close, I felt a shift, a tentative opening of hearts and minds. The path ahead would be challenging, but there was hope in our willingness to face the truth. That evening, as I sat alone in my study, I reflected on the journey so far. The arrogance and disrespect I had endured were symptoms of deeper wounds that now had a chance to heal. I understood that my role was not just to preserve wealth, but to uphold dignity and to foster respect within the family. It was a mantle I embraced with renewed purpose. In the quiet of the night, I resolved to continue this fight, not just for myself, but for the future of the family legacy that had been entrusted to me. The family meeting I had called turned out to be the turning point I had hoped for. The room was heavy with unspoken truths as we gathered, faces tense and eyes wary. But as I began to speak, laying out the facts with clarity and calm, a shift took place. The arrogance and denial that had once ruled were replaced by a somber recognition of responsibility. I was no longer the sidelined elder ignored at gatherings. I was the matriarch who demanded respect and accountability. I established firm boundaries that day, making it clear that the family's future depended on transparency and integrity. No longer would the mistakes of the past be swept under the rug or hidden behind polite smiles. I insisted on regular financial audits and open communication, ensuring that every member understood their role in safeguarding what remained of our legacy. Melissa, humbled and estranged, found herself at a crossroads. The once dismissive daughter-in-law who had mocked my influence now faced the reality of her family's disgrace and the work it would take to earn back trust. I saw glimpses of regret in her eyes, but I knew that forgiveness would not come easily or quickly. Trust, after all, had been broken, and rebuilding it required more than words. In the weeks that followed, I took on a new role, not just within my family, but in the wider community. I established the Evelyn Harper Foundation for Family Legacy Preservation, dedicated to helping families protect their wealth and honor from the kind of betrayal my own had suffered. It was a mission born from pain but fueled by hope, a way to turn my personal struggle into a force for good. The foundation gained attention quickly, resonating with others who had faced similar challenges. I spoke at events, sharing my story and advocating for accountability and respect within families. The woman who had once been dismissed as just the matriarch was now a powerful voice for justice and preservation. Within my family, the transformation was slower but no less significant. I worked tirelessly to mend relationships fractured by greed and deception, fostering dialogue and encouraging healing. The legacy I protected was not merely financial, it was a tapestry of memories, values, and shared history that deserved to be honored. Melissa's attempts to reconnect came cautiously. She sent letters expressing regret and a desire to make amends. I read each one carefully, weighing the sincerity behind the words. While I was open to reconciliation, I made it clear that any reunion would require genuine change and accountability. As I stood in the renovated family home, surrounded by photographs and heirlooms that told the story of generations, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I had reclaimed my place, not as a forgotten elder, but as the guardian of a legacy that would endure. Tomorrow, I would continue building the life I had chosen, one rooted in truth and respect, and if Melissa wished to be part of that life, she would need to prove that she understood the consequences of her actions. I had learned that true family protects and uplifts, not exploits, and in that lesson, I found my strength. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.